This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one website building tool. I've read about this idea that we're all traveling through space-time at the speed of light. But the problem in most resources that I found was that, first of all, it just told me that, but I don't like it. I want to discover things myself. I like to piece things together and then come up with a conclusion myself. I think that's one of the richest way to learn science. But more importantly, I did not see a broader significance of that until a few weeks ago. I finally started reading this book called Relativity Visualized by Louis Epstein, and thank you, because a few of you actually recommended that for me, and I think that has started to blow my mind away, because for one, it does exactly that. It helped me discover by piecing things together as to why we say that things are traveling through space-time at the speed of light, and what does it really mean. But more importantly, it showed me some true incredible explanatory power it had. I mean, I was able to see time dilation, length contraction, relativity of simultaneity, even Twins paradox, all of it, just like in a very brand new perspective. And that's not all. It was also able to help me ponder upon some of the most deepest questions of physics, like why do we have 3 dimensions of space and just 1 dimension of time? Or why is it that I can move freely back and forth through space, but I am always a prisoner of the current, present, now when it comes to time? So I am now super excited to share this with you. And if you are as well, let's get started. So Luis, where do we start? Luis says, let's take a concrete analogy. We have an aeroplane, and let's imagine in this world, the aeroplane will always move at a constant speed of 1 meter per second. Okay. So in the first 1 second, let's say the aeroplane moves straight up. So that's 1 meter. Then in the next 1 second, let's say the aeroplane moves that way, another 1 meter. And in the last 1 second, let's say the aeroplane moves horizontally to the right. Okay. But now, what if we were to look at the same thing one more time, but by putting some lights, and we were to focus on the shadow that the aeroplane formed? What would be the speed of that shadow in each of these seconds? Well, let's see. So in the first 1 second, that shadow is at rest. In the next 1 second, it starts moving, so it speeds up a little bit. So it starts moving with some speed. And then in the last 1 second, it speeds up even more. It moves even faster. Now, here's the big question. Imagine there was a couple of shadow people. You can imagine them to be 2-dimensional beings who thought that their world was 2-dimensional. That's it. They couldn't comprehend the 3rd dimension. So for all they know, that shadow is an actual object. So what would they be seeing and how would they be perceiving things? Well, let's see. From their perspective, they would say in that first 1 second, that shadow was at rest. It didn't move at all. That object is not moving. In the next 1 second, that object say, hey, it started moving a little bit. And then they say, oh, it's moving even faster. So they see that object accelerating. Now, you and I know what's really going on. We understand that really that object is traveling at the same speed in 3 dimensions. But since that shadow only represents a 2-dimensional projection, that's why that shadow will have variable speed. But they don't know that. In fact, if they could see that shadow long enough and the plane kept on moving and twisting and turning, but all the while maintaining that constant speed of 1 meter per second, they will eventually realize that shadow keeps moving, but it will have a maximum speed of 1 meter per second. And they would be wondering why that would be the case. In fact, they would realize that in this world, everything has a speed limit. Their universe has a speed limit of 1 meter per second. Nobody can break through it. They'll postulate it, but they'll have absolutely no idea why that's happening. So do you see what Lewis is foreshadowing over here?
Oh.
Just like those 2-dimensional shadow people, we think that there is a speed limit in our universe, the speed of light, and nothing can go faster than light. But maybe that's because we're seeing a 3-dimensional shadow of what's really happening in 4-dimensional space-time. Maybe everything in the space-time is moving just like that aeroplane at a constant speed, always at the speed of light. But because we are seeing a projection of it in our universe, we perceive it as a speed limit. But maybe it's not the case. Maybe everything is moving at the speed of light.
Okay.
So we can now begin to see where this idea stems from, right?
Okay.
But we are far away from accepting this idea as of now, because remember, this is science. Unlike in religion, we don't just accept ideas. In fact, one of the best ways to deeply understand science is to be a skeptic and always try to figure out what if, like try to counter it, try to refute it from different angles. So that's what we'll do. So we should at this point look at Lewis and say, Lewis, cool story, bro. But how can we validate this? I mean, is there a way that these shadow people can actually somehow validate that from their perspective, that indeed that there's a bigger world out there and objects may be traveling at a constant speed? Because if these shadow people cannot validate it, then we have no idea of validate. I mean, we will not be able to validate it, right? and then it'll just remain a story with no reason to have any confidence in it, right? And so this is where Lewis says, maybe they can. I'm like, how? How could these shadow people ever hope to understand that there could be a bigger world out there? Like, how would they do that? Well, the key over here is to imagine a second shadow on a wall perpendicular to this first shadow. Now, I know what you're thinking at this point. I'm also having the same thought. Luis, what's the point of having to look at this shadow? Because these folks are stuck in their 2 dimensions, right? They will not be able to perceive the shadow or look at that shadow. So what's the point in looking at that? And Luis says, well, you're right. But remember, just like us, we are stuck in our 3 dimensions and we cannot see time, but we can still measure the flow of time with our clocks, right? Similarly, what if they cannot see the shadow, but somehow they can measure how quickly that shadow is moving? They can measure the speed of that shadow somehow, okay? Then would they be able to, use the speed of this shadow and then use the speed of this shadow, which they can easily see, and then piece it all together and see there's something deeper going on over here? Well, let's find out. Let's find out if we can do that. So now let's relook at this whole thing in its whole glory now by looking at a couple of shadows, and let's keep track of both the shadows, speed of both the shadows. All right. So in the first 1 second.
That's not really a good comparison, though. Like using a 3rd dimension and comparing it to speed as a 4th dimension for us. Oh, sorry, time.